All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our session today, our President's conversation we're going to be having. I'm really grateful to have so many folks here gathered in Washington for this annual meeting. So glad to have so many of my Villanova Law colleagues front and center. Wow, love that. And I'm really glad to have Jocelyn Benson, the 43rd Secretary of State of Michigan, here to talk with us today. She is not just the Secretary of State of Michigan, but she is our colleague and a friend of ours for so long. In her role as Secretary of State, she is certainly a leader in ensuring elections are secure and accessible. And she, of course, was tasked with, in the job, overseeing the elections. The last two, the 2020 and 2022 elections, saw record turnout and were secure elections, and she got national recognition, the John F. Kennedy Profile and Courage Award, and the Presidential Citizens Medal. She also has implemented new strategies to ensure voting rights for all eligible Michiganders prior to 2020, absentee voting as one of those things. She has overseen over 250 audits, all to ensure the integrity and the accuracy of the elections. As Secretary of State, she has tried to make sure that not only is it a function of government, but trying to make sure that it is one that functions in a way that serves customers who are, of course, the citizens of Michigan. So she has made sure that she's had available online services, 160 self-service stations around the state. There's just so many different ways she's been innovative, and that's really wonderful to make sure that she brings our democracy to the people and to make it as accessible as possible. So she has this distinguished life as a Secretary of State, but of course she is a lawyer, a Harvard Law graduate, a law professor, and a law school dean. So again, as I mentioned, it is a bit of a homecoming. It was really wonderful when we saw each other just a few minutes ago to get started for the day, and she said she's glad to be back at the AALS annual meeting. She served as dean at Wayne State University Law School in Detroit, appointed at age 36, an extraordinarily young age, youngest woman in U.S. history to lead a top 100 accredited law school. And so, she is one of us, and somebody who I knew in our own joint interest in election law as well, and just has had such an extraordinary career. I know we've all got our program, so you can read more about her. And I'm just quite honored to be able to welcome back to the AALS our colleague and the Secretary of State of Michigan. Let's give an AALS welcome to Jocelyn Benson.
Very surreal, because when I was a young law professor, this was like the big show. Like, just to be able to be on a panel was such a big deal. So I'm just a little.
Yeah, and now you get to be on the biggest panel, right?
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Oh gosh, it is honor. It's truly our honor. And so, what we're going to do here, just for the audience, information, we're going to run through a bunch of questions I'll have. We also will try to get to audience questions. And if you have one, I think we would like you to raise your hand. And we'll come around, we'll have cards, and you can write your question on a card. And we'll have folks gather them, so just raise your hand if you want one. And then when you're done, raise the card up, someone will gather it. We're asking for you to do that in the first 30 minutes. So please, if you could do that, we'd very much appreciate it so that we can actually process them and get through if we have time. So let me jump into some of my questions first. Let's start with how did you ever decide to become a lawyer in the first place? Let's go back to the origin story. What was a young Jocelyn Benson thinking about the path in her life, and why becoming a lawyer?
Well, thanks again for having me. It's really an honor to be here and wonderful to be with my colleagues in home again. It's really gratifying and means a lot to be here. So thank you again for the opportunity. And I started, well, my parents were special education teachers. And so I started at a young age as the daughter of two educators, seeing education as the vocation. And then similarly seeing a lot of things wrong in the world and hearing about it from my parents, not in a political way, but in the perspective of two people who were trying to make sure their kids that they taught had access to quality education, and trying to understand why they didn't, and trying to understand why rules were made and funding was allocated in such a way to create this inequity for their students who, again, I was 7 or 8 years old going to class with them and seeing them work. And so that was very formative for me. And I think through all of that, started to understand and just asking a lot of why and being very curious as to how things work, that attorneys really are at the centerpiece of ensuring that the rules that we have as a society, rooted in our Constitution, actually play out the way that they should to further the ideals that we perhaps all share as Americans and as society. And so through that, had an interest in the law, and it was really, actually, I went to college at Wellesley and studied political science, was really seeing the law as the centerpiece of everything we do, and then starting my career at the Southern Poverty Law Center right out of college as an investigative journalist, again, seeing the power of the law to seek justice, and really as the most potent tool we have for ensuring that our country and our society lives up to its ideals of equity and justice for all, that grew in me a love for the law and a desire to understand it, to know it. I didn't necessarily want to practice it, but I knew I wanted a law degree as a tool to be a part of creating a better world, and one in which folks like my parents and so many others would, and the kids that they fought for, would have an equal opportunity to prosper.
Great. So then you become a lawyer, you have this interest in, again, bettering society, helping us live up to our ideals. What took you from that point to becoming an election law scholar, a professor, dean?
It was kind of three things. One, Chris Edley, who was my mentor at Harvard, and who I started working for as a research assistant day one. And it was right at the time, this was in 2001, it was right after the 2000 election, which was the second thing, really seeing, in my view, the failure of an election, a set of election administration to, I think, ensure the will of the people was fully realized, and seeing Florida play out the way it was, watching Bush v. Gore play out the way it did, and actually being in England as a Marshall Scholar at the time of that, and trying to explain to folks from all over the world who I was studying with why this was happening in America in November of 2000. And so that was very formative for me, and really seeing the law and election administrators as the two tent poles for ensuring that the will of the people and the will of the voters come to fruition, or perhaps impeding that, as in my view was the case then. And then one last thing was, after that, after I went to law school and began working on the Help America Vote Act with Professor Edley at the time, later Dean Edley, out at Berkeley, I started to see how much lawyers played a role in really ensuring that things were fixed or things were improved through the passage of the Help America Vote Act. And I was working for Nina Totenberg at NPR my first summer in law school. I was her intern, which was also a very formative experience, but really seeing her coverage of the Supreme Court and spending a lot of time at the U.S. Supreme Court as you know, seeing it and the coverage of it as really surrounding the most powerful institution we have in our country. And so all of that together, I think, really made me see that if we're going to focus on making sure the rules of the game are fair, You have to focus on, and the sort of allocation of power in our country is allocated fairly aligned with the principles of democracy and equity and inclusion, and that everyone, one person, one vote is a reality for everyone, that all of that is tied up in making sure the law works well and that the people enforcing the law and the people administering elections are all on the same page. And the last thing I'll say, what really, to me, was the heart of all of that. That's sort of the head part. What the heart came from was actually being in Selma, Alabama. I started my career again in Montgomery, Alabama at the Southern Poverty Law Center. And it was really spending time in Selma. I would read Taylor Branch's books. I would watch Eyes on the Prize. I would go on my own to walk across the bridge and stand where John Lewis and others stood in March of '65, that I was really instilled with a deep sense of responsibility to ask myself, one, would I have been someone, or I certainly hope I would be, I wanted to be someone who would have stood on that bridge in March of 1965 and faced down the violence in order to make sure that promise of one person, one vote was a reality. And in answering that question, to really look for where the foot of that bridge is today in this modern era, and to try to be there. And all of that, in that moment in 2000, really came down to becoming an election lawyer, and as a way of really ensuring that the promise of the civil rights movement and the promise of the Voting Rights Act was also fully realized.
So, as professor or dean, what was the most enjoyable part of your life as a professor and or dean?
I mean, I love working with the professors and sort of fighting for the law school within the university system, fighting for a better budget, fighting for better scholarships for our students, reconnecting our alums to the institution, which was a great pathway for our students to become who they wanted to be with their law degree. But all of that was really tied up in just trying to ensure a legal education was one that didn't narrow opportunities for our students, but created more, meaning my legal education was very much felt narrowing. It very much felt like I had to be an attorney, I had to practice, there was all these other things I could do, but the current was putting me in one direction. And what I felt a lot of pride in working to do as the Dean of Wayne State Law School 10 years ago was trying to broaden that and define our work as creating the next generation of advocates for justice, however students chose to use that degree. And similarly broadening access to the law school, not just to young people wanting to earn a law degree or others mid-career, but journalists and others, and many of the ways in which law schools have evolved since then has been to open our doors even more broadly, to welcome other professions in and have the law degree be a tool for enhancing whatever it is you do whether it's in journalism or policymaking or, of course, as a lawyer.
Great. So you were enjoying that life, making a difference, building an institution, helping train that next generation of lawyers, but you decide to change your professional life when you decide to run for office. So what was that decision like for you?
Well, the common thread throughout my entire career, whether I was working in PR or whether I was a dean or whether I was teaching or writing or working in sports, as I also did for a few years in running a nonprofit in sports, the common thread was always access to government and access to democracy and voting, and really rooted in that time I spent in Selma. And so for me, I realized that there were a lot of ways in which one person could have an impact on making sure everyone could vote and believe in their voice and their vote and ensuring everyone has a seat at the table for governing decisions. But I felt that, I often say I felt I could either sue my way to equality or I could simply just, instead of trying to compel election administrators through the law to do the right thing, as I felt at the time, I could just run and be an election administrator and then do the job and try to do it right. And so I approached it, and actually before that, as a legal academic would, I wrote a book on the office, went around the country, interviewed every sitting Secretary of State in 2008, and tried to tell their story, Democrats and Republicans, about how important these jobs were, to communicate to voters this job matters. And I really was just so inspired by talking with so many of these people, later of whom many became my colleagues, that I also really wanted to do the job. And running for office was the means to getting there, but it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do or what I aspired to do. But if that was the means to which I could get to do this job, then why not see if I could be successful. And I think the other piece of that was, as I first ran in 2010, when I entered the arena at that point, I looked at it as also, I knew what a Secretary of State should do. I knew how to do the job. So maybe if I ran as a candidate and then pushed whoever was going to win to take this job seriously, to fight for it, to adopt perhaps some of my ideas, then I would be making a difference. And what happened was I went around the state of Michigan, talked to everyone I could in every one of our 83 counties, organized a campaign, raised a lot more money than people thought I would, and no one else got in the race. And I got the party's nomination in 2010, ultimately lost in the general, but I did become the highest Democratic vote getter that year, and it was like by 2018 when it was open again and I ran, I think both parties were like, just let her have it already. So I was able to wage a strong campaign in 2018 and win.
Great. And so you got the job. You spent a lot of time trying to get the job, like you said. You had one try at it, didn't get there, and then you got it. So tell us a little bit about the job and how that fits in with your own sense of how you are defending and protecting and building our democracy.
Well, I'll say at the outset, my colleagues at Wayne State, one of them told me at the time when I was running in 2018, see this as an anthropological experiment. Go into this other environment and just sort of see what it's like. And those words really stuck with me. I don't think he meant the words to stick with me as long as they did. But I do tell my team all the time, and I built a team of lawyers and former students and people who are mission-driven, not political. I say all the time, we're in politics, but we're not of it. We've been very intentional, especially in this role, especially in this moment, of not being political, not being a politician as much as possible. And that really started both by losing the first time I ran, because I'm not afraid to lose. I'm more afraid of not doing the right thing. And then spending time at Wayne State and otherwise learning how to build a team and run an institution that is mission-driven and seeks to make change, even in an arena that is resistant to change. And that's certainly the political arena, unfortunately, as I've found, for lots of different reasons that I think we could go into longer conversation about. But the bottom line is I've been very intentional throughout my time as secretary. I'm now in my 5th or 6th year of not doing what's politic, as my mentor, Judge Damon Keith would often advise me to do, just doing what's right and trying to do the most right every day. And that is hard, but you can also find a lot of courage and strength in that too by surrounding yourself with people who, even when the political arena pressures you to not do the right thing, you surround yourself with a team who reinforces your mission, and that makes it easier to do it. But it's still, it's still a very bloody arena, not just in the national scale, which many people see with Donald Trump and sort of the noise of the last several years around democracy, but also in the state. And it just sort of the pettiness of politics is really demoralizing at times, because not to belabor the point, but when it comes to policy making, I got in there thinking, oh, well, you just present the data and the facts, and sure, we can all, do the political noise outside, but when we get into the hearing room or we get into a lawmaking room, we'll all kind of understand the right thing to do. Like, objectively, when the data and the facts point in a certain direction, maybe we would all go in that direction. And seeing the ways in which data is ignored and politics is preferred when it comes to policymaking is really discouraging, because I'm trying to fight for people to believe in this system, and then you see lawmakers not do what's right, I guess, just to put it mildly, and to choose politics over what's right, and it can be and still be successful, and they're still successful, and it's very discouraging. But when you're on the front lines of a battle, you see, it's not necessarily all roses all the time.
Right. So in the job itself, what are some of the nuts and bolts things you're most proud of doing? Because you talk about sort of thinking of trying to do the facts more than the politics of it. So what are some of the, and I ran through a couple things in the bio, but What's gotten you really excited that's like on the ground that makes a difference for a Michigander?
Well, certainly, I would say two things. One, I'm the chief election officer for the state of Michigan, but I'm also the chief motor vehicle officer, which essentially means I run the DMV, which makes me very popular, right? And when I came into office, we have 130 branches all around the state. There had been an increase in the number of people driving on our roads, but it decreased in the number of offices, leading to 5 to 8 hour waits. I mean, it's sort of typical of the DMV. So as a good academic would do, I started in my first 100 days visiting every single one of the offices, which, again, is sort of example, like the political people were like, no one cares if you do that, don't do that. But I was like, well, how else will I know? Can't solve a problem, you can't, if you don't have the data. And so I went to every single office, talked to people, and it was very clear. I took notes in every office about what we needed to change, developed a plan. And though COVID hit in the middle of the execution of our plan, we were ultimately able to reduce or eliminate the wait times entirely from every single one of our offices to the city of Detroit, to Grand Rapids, to all the way up in the UP. By moving more transactions outside of the office and also creating a system where people could schedule their visit ahead of time if they chose, giving us more notice about what the transactions were going to be in a given day if people tell us ahead of time by scheduling their visit. So all of it was just, in many ways, math and data and reorganizing and making sure our capacity matches the need of our residents in the offices. And in 3.5 years, we were able to completely eliminate the wait time, completely eliminate all of the challenges in our operations, and actually make the DMV run extremely smoothly. And we're still not done. We've created now mobile offices to go into communities that still can't get to a branch, and college campuses, into senior centers where people can't necessarily get their driver's license unless they go to a branch. We bring the branch to them, all with the view and the philosophy of government should meet people where they are, and then trying to operationalize that, and then all with the sort of mission of making government work better for everybody. Because if you're going around asking people to vote and trying to make voting easier, you got to also, as we all know, make sure that the government doesn't abandon those who you are getting to come out to vote by not serving them well, or saying, well, if you want to come to the government office, it's going to be a 5-hour wait. Instead, showing that you can actually improve government operations has been very gratifying, and truly, the thing that has made the greatest impact among the people I interact with every day is as the feedback I've gotten. The second piece is being the chief election officer. It's been gratifying not just to serve in this role during this historic time for democracy, but to do so while implementing a whole collection of policies that I, as a law professor, would advocate for: election day registration, no reason absentee voting, early voting, automatic voter registration. When I came into office, Michigan voters had just amended our state constitution to put all of those policies into our law and charge me, as the Secretary of State, with implementing them. And so it was incredibly, and not to mention an independent Citizens Redistricting Commission, which the voters also created, which was also put into my office to create and implement. And it was just, I used to have to pinch myself when I was running with my team and say, we really get to just start on day one implementing all these things, which, as I learned, is just as important. Having an administrator who's going to implement these policies well and equitable and successfully and securely is as critical as getting them passed to begin with. And so getting to create this new day for democracy in our state, and then see highest turnout in our state's history as a result of all these policies being put into place, has been extremely gratifying, because it's reaffirmed what I believed as an academic, that if you follow the data on both those fronts and you implement good policies well, free of politics, you actually can change things in a very significant way, and then get reelected.
Reducing wait time at the DMV and getting reelected.
Yeah, goes hand in hand.
Excellent. And so on the chief election officer, to continue that, and our theme, again, it's defending democracy. How do you see that work continuing for you? You've put these things in place. What are some of the challenges that are ahead for you? All the things you talked about are extraordinary, and I know a lot of us in this room have, talked about this in our scholarship, taught it in our classes, but you're doing it, which is great. What's next in terms of defending democracy and protecting it and building it and strengthening it in Michigan?
Well, at the precipice of 2024, in day 3 or 4 of 2024, I don't know what our democracy is going to look like a year from now. I have hope of the direction we can go in. I have fears of the direction the other direction we could go in. And it's not related necessarily to any one person winning or losing an election. It's really related to what we all as citizens are going to do for the next 12 months. And the democracy we can either push for and create together, or advocate for together and realize together, or the democracy that could wither on the vine if we don't take responsibility, all of us, but particularly in this industry, to engage the American citizens in understanding how important this moment is for defining the future of our democracy. And as we, I think one of the more challenging things in that is I often refer it to as the noise, but it's the difficulty, especially as an educator, which is really my job, or this is who I consider myself to be, trying to get out truthful information in this fog of misinformation that's coming from all different directions with all different agendas, not to mention the sort of the potential, the under-realized but very real potential of foreign interference in misinformation and the spread of misinformation and the way in which people get their information. All of that it makes you feel like oftentimes you're just shouting into the abyss and no one can hear you, even though you're trying to speak the truth and educate and inspire and encourage people to stay engaged, and still it just doesn't reach its intended audience because it gets tangled up in so much misinformation. So that, to me, is the battle that we're fighting: truth, education, and certainly it doesn't help to have candidates with very large megaphones spreading lies along with the whole ecosystem that are repeating lies, and it's very demoralizing. And there are many times in which it feels more and more like the volume on the misinformation is getting louder and the volume on the education and the truth is diminishing. So going into 24, that is, to me, the challenge, but it's one that, again, if history teaches us anything, it's that democracy survives and thrives when we, the people, demand that it does. That's what 1965 was about in Selma. That's what the post-Civil War era was about, when we saw increased enfranchisement previous to the Jim Crow era. So to me, I believe the future of our democracy is in all of our hands, and I think my hope is that we'll all spend this year trying to help as many people realize that as possible, become critical consumers of information, and really fight back against the misinformation with truth and engagement and voting, and not allowing those who try to gain power through division and misinformation to rule the day.
That's excellent. So I was just looking at social media, and you said your New Year's resolution for 2024, just on this context. My New Year's resolution for 2024, democracy will prevail. So we are now several days into the year, as you just mentioned. So how are we doing?
How am I feeling?
How are we feeling
Thursday?
about that?
I wish I could say that I am energized, but I'm really tired. I'm really exhausted of fighting this battle, and I'm really discouraged by, I just don't like politics, and I'm really discouraged by the disarray and the political noise and the political rancor. And I know that's what this year's going to be about, but I just, I'm discouraged, but I'm hopeful, because every conversation I've had in these last 4 days, I feel, look, it's hard because the biggest story in our work and my work of these last few days has been this 14th Amendment issue, which is inherently complex, and I feel it's really demoralizing to see the focus being on that, personally, frankly. I know you'll now want to talk more about that issue, and I just hope it gets settled as soon as possible so we can move on, frankly, in my view, whatever direction that is. But yeah, it's just really, I feel like we're not focused as a community. Those of us who want to defend democracy, I feel like we're not focused and we're not moving in alignment. We're kind of going all over the place. And what I know is that democracy, the enemies, forgive the language, but those who oppose democracy, those who want to see it diminish in America And there are a lot of people globally who want to see that, as well as I believe in our country. The enemies of democracy want chaos, confusion, and fear. Like, that's the goal. Create chaos, create confusion, and create fear that causes people to stay home, disengage, and stop believing in their democracy, in their government, and in their own voice. So the counter to that has to be giving clarity and certainty and instilling confidence in people on all those things. And that's how I've seen my mission since 2020, when we were fighting the confusion and chaos and fear that COVID and the ways in which COVID was, all the misinformation was used to create that. And so I see the battlefront along those lines, and I think it's when I see allies not aligned on the creating confidence and certainty and clarity side, and even perhaps feeding into the chaos, confusion, and fear, it's really just frustrating, because we're not like, we've got to stay focused on the mission and the battle, and we're not right now. So, and again, that's the goal. So there's a lot of ways in which that I think you can add substance to that. But so yeah, I'm nervous. Mm-hmm. But nerves are good, because nerves cause you to work harder and stay focused and not blink or flinch, and we will get through this. I have hope that we will, and I think then what we have to do is figure out what we're going to be in the future after 24 happens. What will the future of democracy look like in 2025 and beyond? How will we define it? And will we embrace the opportunity that we have as a country in this moment to truly become a pluralistic, inclusive democracy, as our country and the demographics of our country become more pluralistic and inclusive? Can we truly transition into a truly multiracial, multi-ethnic, pluralistic democracy for the next several decades, for the next generation? That's the fight, to me, ultimately. And I don't want us to lose sight of that either, because that's also the opportunity we have at our hands if we protect democracy in this moment and engage a new generation and our entire country in seeing what we could be if our democracy grows and thrives and takes this moment to become stronger than it was going in.
So there's a lot in that answer, and questions which have actually come in and that I don't want to talk to you about as well. So sort of combining a little bit of your questions and your answers already. Just one thing in particular, you're talking about your nervousness, your frustration, your concerns. I'll also take us back a few years in 2020, when there was a very serious plot to kidnap your governor. You referred to running for office and the team you were with, and it was, I think, something that certainly shocked all of us to see how far political violence had gone. And this is, to put it in context, we obviously have seen, and we're living with the aftermath of the insurrection, but this is before the insurrection. So, in that context and the threats of political violence, how do you, I guess one is like, what do you do in terms of your job? But also, how does that weigh into your assessments of how we're going to do going forward as a democracy?
I think the answer to both of those things is you use the challenges to make you stronger and emboldened and more determined. And that's been my lesson throughout everything, in that the governor and the Attorney General, who I'm so honored to serve alongside, and we truly are good friends and aligned in our mission, that even if we don't always talk about it, that we try to embody this idea that when things are bad, or when you get scared, or when people show up outside your home with guns and try to threaten you, or all the rest that all of us have experienced, you use all of that to become better at your jobs, stronger and more focused and emboldened to do the work that you feel you were elected to do. And it's analogous to, I believe, the path of defending democracy right now, which is use these challenges to make our democracy stronger, and use the attention and the focus on democracy to get more people fighting to make it stronger. And that, to me, is how we get out of this moment, by taking every arrow and using it to, come back stronger. And when you truly see it like that, as I've worked with my team to really do, you start just seeing the the arrows thrown at you, however they come, as opportunities to just get better. And so you almost start welcoming them because you know you're going to use it to be better than you were the day before. And that's very empowering, and it almost creates an energy of forward motion as you kind of walk through the darkness, to know that the darkness is only making you better at doing the work that you want to do, and ultimately will help our democracy be better than it was when we started doing this work, which is kind of the goal that we all have.
So I think related to that and your attitude and the folks you work with, I referenced earlier your becoming dean at 36 and the youngest woman in history to lead a top law school. You are elected alongside Gretchen Whitmer and Attorney General Nessel, making history as being 3 women in the top constitutional offices of your state. And of course, we can't forget being one of a very small group of women to complete the Boston Marathon while 8 months pregnant.
When I was dean.
When you were
it was because my wonderful team at the law school were supporting me all the way. Maybe a big banner.
Absolutely. So remarkable accomplishments, and walking through life every day, and being the first woman in so many contexts. And how has that impacted your own approach, and what do you feel like are some of the challenges and certainly opportunities in your life as a trailblazer? I mean, you talked about Damon Keith, who was just a remarkable trailblazer judge himself, so you've obviously had plenty of role models, but specifically as a woman in your various whatever it is, whatever parts of your life, you've been a trailblazer. So reflect on that.
Well, it's sort of, running marathons is so much a metaphor for so many things, and in this way it is as well. In that when I qualified for Boston and signed up for Boston, I was really excited, and then I found out, I think like a week later, I was pregnant. And I did the math, and my initial thought was, I can't run now. I can't run Boston because I'll be 36, 37 weeks. And at that point, I think it was 36. And so my initial thought was, I can't do it. And then I did some research and found out that a woman the year before, with my same due date, had run and completed the Boston Marathon. And my husband was like, oh no, we're doing this. And, but it was so impactful to me because she did it. I thought I could do it. And I thought, I don't know if I'm actually gonna finish the marathon, but I wanna try. I wanna train, I wanna, one step at a time. I just wanna try. And if I run 8 miles, then I'll be able to say I ran 8 miles of the Boston Marathon while I was 8 months pregnant. If I run half of the way, then I'll be able to say I completed half of the way. But just like, see what happens, try. But it was because she did it that I believed I could. And I also wanted to try so that if I did do it, someone else would believe that they could do it too. And that's kind of it. I mean, when you look at Gretchen and Dana and I, we all ran for different reasons, and really because we wanted to do these jobs. But by doing so, we want to show that it's possible. And whether it's running for office or achieving another dream or another way of making change, our actions will show and define what is possible for our people who look to us. And that really has been, part of my work, I think, throughout my time, recognizing also that it was great advice I got when I was dean and dealing with a challenge. A woman mentor, a female mentor of mine who ran a business and from a very young age up until she retired, said, even when you feel like people are treating you differently because of your gender or not giving you a chance or not taking you seriously or you have to work so much harder, that's all true. But think about the people who don't have as much power and influence and authority as you, because they're dealing with it too, and it's much worse for them. So focus on that. Don't focus necessarily on banging your head against the wall and being frustrated about how you're being treated. Try to focus on those other women who are having it worse and have less power and less platform than you. And that's really helped me as well, I think, get through challenges where you see where you see challenges or barriers, however you define them, and you think, well, who else is dealing with this, and how can I help them? So that's been part of the work moving forward.
And in the context of the plot to kidnap the governor, we've seen, and this is, I think, something which I want to raise, but also a question from the audience also. Actually, I'll just read it as written. It's one barrier to access to democracy in this political climate involves threats to women leaders, including the kidnapping plot against Governor Whitmer and the defamatory attacks on Georgia election workers. How can we combat such threats against women?
Yeah, we stare right into the abyss and say, well, I mean, what Gretchen and I say is that we stare right into it and say, bring it on, because it's just gonna make us better. It's just gonna make us stronger. And that's what you've seen with Ruby and Shay Moss as well, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who I've gotten to know throughout this ordeal. And similarly, again, recognizing that if you as a person can learn to take life's adversities and use them to make you better at your job, at your work, a better person, then you've overcome whatever it is that those threatening you are trying to achieve. You've actually countered what they're trying to achieve, and they've failed, and you've become stronger and better. And I think related to that, again, when we've all been dealing with these, whether it's Shay and Ruby in Georgia or the governor or myself or Dana, we recognize, at least I recognize, there was this night where people were outside my home with guns trying to get me to not certify the 2020 election. And I had this moment in my house where I thought, they're not protesting me. They're protesting democracy. They're protesting the will of the people. They don't like how people voted, and now they're trying to threaten me as a result. And my job is to protect democracy. And so they can threaten me all they want. I'm not gonna allow, what they're really threatening is our American democracy, and I'm not gonna allow that to succeed. And so starting to see the battle not as a personal one, but one that's a threat to what you represent enables me, at least, and I think Shay and Ruby as well, because we've talked about this, to see the battle as one that creates a sense of purpose and responsibility that we have to fight, and then again, channel all that into making our democracy more secure and accessible and stronger, and speaking the truth and telling our story, which Shay and Ruby have done quite well and quite effectively, and then seeking justice, which they've also done quite effectively. And we're all better for it. I mean, thank goodness they didn't just take the threats and walk away, right? Instead, they said, no, you can't threaten me, and you can't threaten our democracy, and we're gonna push back, and we're gonna stand our ground, and then we're gonna seek justice. And the more we do that, and the more women demonstrate that that's how you react to these threats, not by cowering, not by succumbing, but by getting stronger and seeking justice and speaking the truth, then we can continue to show, I hope, other women entering various fields how to operate amidst the threats, and then ultimately, I hope, diminish the threats, because at the very least, they'll not be successful.
Great. So we have some questions also, which I want to get to, and you raised, about the 14th Amendment, Section 3, in a room full of law professors. No
matter what I say, everyone will be mad.
Exactly.
No one will agree with me.
So, we are in the dead middle of this, right? We have your counterpart in Maine who has made a decision. The Supreme Court of Colorado has made a decision. You have, your Supreme Court has made a decision, others. So, we're getting different, different answers to the key question of whether or not Donald Trump can be on the ballot because of this question of his qualifications, and different bodies making the decision, whether it's the Secretary of State, whether it's the Supreme Court. This may indeed get to the U.S. Supreme Court. So tell us who should decide, merits, timing on the question of the interpretation of the 14th Amendment, Section 3.
Yeah, well, I think there's three things here. One is the substantive question. Second is the who. Who should be deciding this issue of sort of first impression. and at what point is it ripe? I think, in my view, the first issue is it's not as, in my view, there are a lot of factual and legal ambiguities that make this not directly analogous to someone who's clearly served 2 terms and wants to serve a third, or someone who all the facts affirm was not born in the United States. When there are factual and legal ambiguities of how you define insurrection under this clause, how you define aiding and abetting, how you ensure due process, all of those things are complex and really yield to this question of who should be deciding not just qualifications, but who should be interpreting this in a way that will give us clarity and finality, and then when. And so all of that has, and I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post on this in September when this first emerged, led me to conclude and really feel quite strongly that the US Supreme Court needs to decide this sooner rather than later, and has to be on the merits, and it has to give some sort of clarity and finality to this. Otherwise, we are just going to devolve into a lot of, everyone has their own interpretations and opinions about this, and everyone feels theirs is clear and right. And my position is simply it's not as clear-cut as many people on both sides are making it out to be. And in that recognition, and in recognition of the fact that whatever we do in this matter of first impression creates a precedent for the future, we have to be very careful, transparent, and completely by the book in how this should play out. And if I were, in my view, that's what the US Supreme Court is for. We can debate and discuss, the current makeup of the US Supreme Court and all of that right now. Yes, that's a reality. But from a legal standpoint, from a legal precedent standpoint, in my view, when you have these questions of fact and law, it's the job of the courts to figure that out. It's not the job of one politician to make that call. And I've said that clearly. I've said that as a Secretary of State. The vast majority of my colleagues have agreed and moved in alignment. So we'll see how it plays out. And I'm hopeful and very hopeful and believe that the US Supreme Court will provide some clarity sooner rather than later. I hope they don't kick it to Congress. I fear they might say, this is a decision for Congress to make, which is again, substantively, for me, the worst possible thing to think of, because then it's gonna just evolve into politics in terms of factual determination, legal determination, but I suspect that may be how it plays out, given past precedent and comments they've made in other cases on this sort of area. So we'll see, but it's not, but yeah, so I think, and we are on the path for getting, Donald Trump, I think, filed in the US Supreme Court yesterday or this week. My state will be, I will be filing an amicus to the US Supreme Court on Monday, asking for a substantive decision on the merits as soon as possible. And my hope is that whatever that decision is, provides some sort of finality so that we can move on with the administration of our elections.
Sure. So to follow up on that for a second, so you're talking about the prospect, and by the way, I commend to everybody to read the op-ed from the Washington Post, very helpful. But you'd say they may kick it to Congress. Would that be, to get into the weeds for a second, political question doctrine, do you think?
Yeah. Or interpreting the 14th Amendment to say Congress should decide whether under this someone is ineligible to serve. And then it would be, it would be after the election, if it comes to, if it's an open question at that point. And it could mean a year from now,
right,
on January 4th and 5th and 6th, it's being debated. That to me would be a really, and then that keeps the question alive also, right, and debated throughout the whole election cycle. But again, it's going to be a messy year, whether this issue makes it messy or other issues make it messy. The bottom line, again, from my focus is I do believe the elections this year will determine and influence, if not determine, the future of our democracy. I do believe that voters participating in them need to take all of this into consideration as they make their decisions. And that's what I've been trying to say to the voters in my state, and if given the opportunity, voters in other states, that none of this changes the battle that we're in, to me, which has far more adversaries than just one person. And none of it changes the opportunity before us, which is to fight for a better democracy that emerges from this moment healthier and more robust than ever before.
So you're fast forwarding to a year from now. We are, January 6th has a particular meaning. You're talking about, again, a year from now, whether we'd be looking at anything comparable. But let's go back to January 6th, 2021. You're Secretary of State at that point. You're witnessing what's happening at the Capitol. What was going through your mind at that time? Certainly, as you have made clear to all of us, your own devotion to our democracy, personally, the things that motivate you, but also you have a job. So what kind of thoughts were running through your head then?
I was really sad. I mean, I think two main thoughts were, one, just absolute horror at what was unfolding as it was unfolding, which we didn't know how it was going to end. You just saw the images, you saw what was happening, you heard from people who were there. So just real fear and just sadness. And then that quickly transitioned to just a recognition that this is all happening because of a lie. It's a lie, right? And it wasn't, I always try to understand, this is what we do as lawyers, you try to understand the kernel of truth in our opponent's argument or position. And I just thought, all these folks are doing this because they've been lied to and they believe that lie. And that's really tragic and really sad. And as an educator, heartbreaking. As someone who wants everyone to believe, no matter how they vote, in the power of their vote and their voice, in the power of democracy. It was really sad to see so many people try to reject democracy based on a lie. So yeah, it was just really sad. And then so the last piece of it is, and this we felt throughout the whole 70 however days between when the polls closed in November and January 6th, was that we actually had a really successful election in Michigan. We got our votes counted 24 hours after the polls closed, 2 days faster than anyone thought we could. More people voted than ever before. We implemented all of these changes, automatic voter registration, all these things, and it worked, and people voted, and things went smoothly, and we had a great process. It wasn't until the results became known, 24 hours after the polls closed, that things started to go awry. And so it was very frustrating to not be able to take a minute even to celebrate the success, but just have to go into defense mode. And then the last thing I'll say, I think, as the day unfolded, is just recognizing that everything we had fought through, and it was treacherous every day from November 10th to January 6th, you'd wake up thinking, all right, this is it. If we certify our election, we'll be done. If we get those electoral college votes to the National Archives, we'll have done it. And every time you think you've defeated the effort to overturn the will of the people in your state, another thing pops up that you have to battle. And so by January 6th, when it was just this culmination of all of these smaller skirmishes we'd been witnessing, I just said, this is just the beginning. This is not going to end. I stopped believing that this was going to end. The challenges to democracy were going to end with that cycle. And I started to see the cycle of 2020 as the beginning of this multi-year effort that we've been involved in. And I started to see 2024 as, I hope, the grand finale of this three-cycle effort that we've been witnessing. And I do believe there's an opportunity in 24 to defend democracy with such certainty and clarity and effectiveness that we do put an end to this modern challenge to it. And so that's what I hope 24 ultimately is, a time for in 25 we can move on and define what the era after this last few years will look like. And that, I think, again, is the opportunity before us over these next 12 months.
Wow. Thank you. I love that. Defend democracy with certainty, clarity, and effectiveness. And indeed, we are here talking about defending democracy. And in the context of the work we do, I think a question that follows that came from our audience, what resources would you suggest law professors employ to help students and family members critically analyze misinformation they have received about the so-called stolen election of 2020. So I guess getting that specific point you're making before about witnessing what happened and I guess the nature of your concerns, How do we, as law professors, help in that specific context of the misinformation?
Well, I certainly think experiential learning, as many of us know, is really powerful. And there are a lot of ways in which you can apply that here. Certainly having law students, give them the day off on any election. There's many this year, not just November. In Michigan, we're having 3 statewide elections and a few local ones as well. But giving them the day or encouraging them or giving them credit for being a poll worker, and seeing firsthand, perhaps in one of the primary elections in your states, how elections work, and then using that to tell people how it actually works. The truth is on our side in this regard, in terms of our elections in every state being accessible and secure, and the results being an accurate reflection of the will of the people. And so there's no shortage of activities or actions you can take, from being a part of an audit, which many states do after an election, or simply just going to a certification hearing and seeing how that plays out. But certainly the power and the work of just being an election worker for a day is probably the best thing one can do to see firsthand through experience the truth about our elections in a way that can counter the misinformation. And then I think secondly, to not turn away from the noise, where I say this as someone who, that was sort of my mode up, to just not listen to it. I think actually taking it on and really peeling it back and saying, no, we had 250 audits in Michigan and this is what we found, and really continuing to have those conversations with people who have been misled, and recognizing you're not going to necessarily be successful, but the effort. I mean, when I ran the Boston Marathon, I didn't know if I was going to succeed, right? I didn't know if I was going to finish it. When I ran for office, I didn't know if I was going to win. We engage in these conversations, we engage in this work because it's the right thing to do, and we have faith that it moves the ball forward even if we don't see the results of our work. That's kind of also what education is, right? So I would encourage students to, and I would encourage all of us to have those conversations, to recognize that people have been fed a diet of misinformation for years now, and it may not be possible to witness their transformation back to reality, but that doesn't mean we don't continue to speak the truth, and find ways to live the truth as well. I will sort of put a pin on that by just saying that I think part of the goal of those who are trying to spread misinformation to deter democracy is to have people lose faith in their voice and their vote, but to have them stop participating and give up on democracy altogether. So if law students can at least take responsibility for ensuring we don't give up on democracy, for believing in that concept and the power of it, and then seeing its effectiveness and sort of teaching that history, I think we can leverage our influence as law professors and as in legal academia and as students in our classes to be a part of moving the ball forward in this moment and cutting through some of the misinformation. There's some work we're doing in Michigan. We call it the Voter Confidence Council, where we are bringing together educators, faith leaders, sports leaders, business leaders, labor leaders, and other community leaders, people who have a voice of influence, to equip them with information about our elections so that wherever they stand, they can help us disseminate that truthful information. So being a part of that as well, and working with your respective states to be an ally as they try to get out trusted information to different circles can be powerful as well.
Excellent. Let me just follow up a little bit about schools, law schools. What I have tried to say throughout this year is that we, in our teaching, in our scholarship, and the culture of the school, can try to defend democracy. So as a dean, professor, scholar, what do you think, inside the school building would be a couple of particular things that we might walk away with for, what would be something we could do, like when we start classes again in a couple of weeks?
Well, I would say first, see yourself not as separate from democracy, but a part of it. So, registering people to vote, or encouraging them to get registered to vote, or getting information out about registering to vote and become the process, encouraging students and alums to even host a polling place, which we did at Wayne State. We hosted it at the Damon Keith Center, which was, really empowering for students to then have ownership of a polling place at their school that they're hosting, and seeing people, enabling them to vote there. So hosting a polling place, registering people to vote. I've been working with our college presidents in Michigan to register every student in the fall when they come to campus, when they register for classes, give them an opportunity to register to vote at that same time. And then beyond that, I would have, if possible, all of the professors and staff in the community, not just host a polling place, but perhaps sign up to be an election worker in addition to that, or in lieu of that, at a local precinct. That really is critical for being a part of taking ownership of the administration of elections. And then, third, so registering everyone to vote, polling place hosting, or serving as a poll worker. And the third thing is have these conversations, particularly conversations bringing together, as we can do so well, hopefully in the educational environment, of people who don't see eye to eye on the reality of election administration, and host those conversations, have students talk about them, and have students talk about them through the lens not of who are we going to vote for, who's going to win, or the sort of horse race, but who are we going to be, and what do we want our democracy to be moving forward, and how are we going to be a part of defining that for the future, and how does this moment enable us to do that? So just having those more broader conversations about what our democracy is, and whether or not we're going to take responsibility for strengthening it now and in the future, and seeing how those go, and really getting students thinking about the role that they're going to play also as attorneys in this work, not just in this moment, but in the years to come.
Great. So here, an audience question. Could you tell us about Michigan's new law to curb deepfakes in elections? Mm-hmm. What are some other concerns you have about AI in election administration?
Well, in an election cycle where misinformation is going to be the tool for deterring people from participating, for trying to delegitimize our processes and our results, we have a responsibility to do everything we can to get out in front of it. So what we've done is, along with, I think, a handful of other states, is enact laws that both require disclosure and disclaimers of any political communication that is created through artificial intelligence, and then also criminalize the use of deep fakes or intentionally misinforming, creating communications that would intentionally misform or create misinformation about a particular candidate or a particular issue. So creating criminal penalties for that. It's analogous to the federal legislation that Senators Hawley and Senator Klobuchar have introduced. And it's something that we think every state needs to do as a first step. The second, beyond that, once you have those legal protections in place, is of course educating voters about what to do if they spot a deep fake, how to report it, having a system for that, which we've set up. And we have a misinformation website, hotline, and email where people can send things so that we can make sure things are taken down. And then third, trying to partner to the extent possible with technology organizations and social media companies so that when there are things that are out there, we can rapidly respond and have them taken down. The last thing we're also doing in every election, we've done this since I took office, but we're doing it turbocharged this year, is we have a field team in place on election day. And we now have 9 days of early voting, so they'll be in place throughout that as well. To rapidly respond to rumors about what could be happening at the polls. Because I'm worried not just about deepfakes saying candidates saying XYZ, I'm worried about artificial intelligence being used to spread rumors about violence at polling places or just long lines to deter people from showing up. So we're going to have a team working with law enforcement to monitor that, and then be able to go to a polling place, affirm that something's not accurate, put out trusted and real information, and then build a network to disseminate that information through media and elsewhere. So basically to combat that, to anticipate the lies, and to try to have a rapid response team in place to combat with the truth. And then related to that, we're talking about all this now so that people know if they hear about things on election day that it could be artificial intelligence, and to be critical consumers of information so that we can, and to sort of question if you hear something as opposed to assuming it's a fact, and trying to work with the voter confidence councils I mentioned earlier, which we have set up in various places throughout our state in 10 different communities to get the information out proactively and reactively.
Thank you. We have time for a couple more questions, and I'm going to sort of turn the last bit to maybe away from your job as much, but also related to it, but to who you are. And one of the questions that came in is, can you talk about your personal leadership style? You supervise many people in a variety of areas, and it would be great to hear how you keep people motivated when faced with challenges.
I would say three things. One, I've built a team that's very mission-driven, and we have a strategic planning retreat every year. Our January one is on Monday, the 8th, where we set out our goals for the year. Everyone says, these are our goals. We break them down annual, then monthly, and then weekly, and then we have weekly meetings and we track our goals. So that helps operationalize what we want to achieve in a particular year. And it's been really great over the last 6 years to see our to-do list diminish as we've accomplished things. We had like a big to-do list in January of 2019, and it's gotten smaller and smaller, which also helps us feel forward progress, like we're actually accomplishing something as a team, but also enables us to hold each other accountable and have clarity in terms of what expectations are from our colleagues and from ourselves. So that's one. Two, I take a very sort of collaborative approach to decision making along the way. I believe, as someone who loves democracy, that not one party or not one person have all the solutions and ideas, but through collaboration and even deliberation, we can come up with the best solution. So creating an environment where people feel comfortable and that it's expected, not only that we collaborate, but that we deliberate, that we challenge each other, that people know I don't believe my say is the be-all, end-all, but I believe and respect everyone as experts in their chosen positions to help us come up with solutions together. So creating an environment where that collaboration and deliberation is expected and is the norm and is welcome and is encouraged. And then finally, I say to my team, and I said this when I was dean, we had the dean's office values. I need three things: honesty, integrity, and reliability. I need you to just be honest with me. Don't lie and say you didn't do something, because just be honest with ourselves and our colleagues. Act with integrity even when no one else is looking, that sort of basic expectation and fiduciary responsibilities and all of that. And then be reliable. If you say you're going to do something, if you commit to do something, do it. And if something happens, and it can, be honest about what happened so that we can work together as a team to remedy it. And I tell my team, that's all I need. If you can give me those three things, then even if you miss deadlines, then we're fine, because I know I can trust you, and you're acting with integrity, and I know you're going to work to be reliable, and you're going to be honest about what happens if something goes wrong. And then with all of that in place, we operationalize our work with sort of one overarching thing, which I always say, we're a family-first team. All of us, I have a 7-year-old, almost everyone on my team has either young kids or family members they're responsible for taking care of, or partners or others, and we have each other's backs, and I do this myself. If my kid needs me to leave in the middle of the day to go pick him up at school, I go do it, both for him, but also for my team to see that that's okay. And it frees them up to do the same. My chief of staff has 3 young kids, all under the age of 10. If she needs to take a day off because one of them is sick, that's cool. We do it. And no questions asked. That's been the culture that we've built since day one. And it enables us to essentially be whole people, which you have to do when you're in a battle type of environment, as we are. We can't run people into the ground. We have to allow people to have whole lives and create that balance. And it's been really a source of joy to be able to do that from the top, and to say, yeah, guys, I'm not going to be at this meeting today because I have to go, like, my kid forgot his blanket, and I have to go get it for him. And everyone's like, okay. So it's fun to lead from that way.
So you just mentioned that you have your annual retreat, strategic planning, on Monday. Monday also happens to be the day in which the University of Michigan will be playing.
I'm not going to the game.
National
I have to work.
You got to go to work. So what are your predictions for, I guess?
Oh, I mean, obviously, go blue. It's going to be a great game. Sorry, Washington, it's not your year.
A couple of Huskies fans out there, a couple of Michigan.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, I guess it's a good time for football in Michigan with the
Yeah.
Lions.
You know,
I know you're a Lions fan also.
Yeah, and I grew up in Pittsburgh as well, and so I sort of bleed black and gold also. But football is a passion of mine, as is baseball. But it's also been notable that, and I said this at an event I was at a few days ago, that what I'm most worried about this year is how divided we are in so many ways, and how I don't yet see a leader or leaders that can bring us back together, or a message that can unify us, other than sports. And we do see, right? And that was after the Lions won, beat the Cowboys, but didn't beat the Cowboys.
Yeah.
And so everyone's like, come on, we can all agree on that, right? And so this idea of the unifying power of sports is something that I think is operational as we kind of figure out how to come back together as a country after this moment, which we all have to be thinking about. I mean, we're in the midst of a battle over the future of our democracy in our country in this moment, but there will be a future, and we all have to figure out whether it's this year or 3 years from now or 5 years, what we're fighting for and what we want to get towards. I know what I want to get towards. I want to get towards a true multiracial, multi-ethnic, inclusive democracy where every voice is valued and every voice is heard. That's what I'm fighting for. So I do think the unifying sort of thing in this moment is for us to redecide as a country of who we want to be and what we want to be together. And our sports teams can, in many ways, provide some at least fodder for envisioning what that could be like, as we all agree our teams are.
Yeah, and as someone who grew up here in Washington, D.C., I can agree the Cowboys lost.
Yeah.
The Lions won that game. So as you talk about your future, I'll close on this. You constantly speak about your vision and for what our country looks like. So specifically for you, does that involve national stage, political service, government service? What is next? I know you've got a job you've got to do every day, but what is next for you?
Well, I am term limited, unfortunately, and it was a very, as someone who aspired to do this job and loves this job, and always, it's very kind of jarring to suddenly win an election and not be able to run for this job ever again. But there are still many ways to serve, and there's still many ways I intend to serve in Michigan. So we'll see what 2026 brings. I'll provide some clarity on that after we get through the 2024 election cycle. But what I have seen through my work now on behalf of the state of Michigan is how much opportunity there is in our state to make government work well. And I've taken a state agency from being a sort of the butt of jokes to being a model for how a state agency can run. And I really want to see, if we can make all of state government work that well, and truly lead Michigan from a perspective of a common vision of who we want to be, and operationalize a state government that serves everyone effectively and equally. And so I intend to try to stay in the game, and I'll focus more on that and make relevant announcements after we get through 2024.
I kind of expected that answer, but did have to ask. And obviously, you're always welcome back at, there's 200 law schools around the country. I'm sure we'd all be happy to have you back in the classroom, teaching, writing, but above all, sharing your wisdom with all of us. And I'm grateful that you came here today. And on behalf of the AALS, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.